My name is Ruby Jean Whitaker. I am 70 years old and I live right here in Orlando, Florida. In a little cream-colored house on Magnolia Terrace Drive with a big front porch and a ceiling fan that wobbles just a little when the summer wind picks up. I have lived in this house for 31 years. I raised my son Thomas here. I painted these walls myself. I planted the rose bushes along the front fence with my own hands. Every corner of this house has a memory soaked right into the wood and the walls, and I would not trade a single one of them for anything in this world. I spent 34 years working as a registered nurse at Orlando Regional Medical Center. 34 years of night shifts and double shifts and holidays away from home because somebody had to be there for the patients who had nobody else. I held hands with people at the worst moments of their lives. I helped bring babies into this world. I sat beside elderly patients at 3 in the morning when they were scared, and I told them they were not going to be alone, not on my watch. That was my work and I was proud of every single day of it. I retired 4 years ago, shortly after my 66th birthday, and when I walked out of those hospital doors for the last time, my colleagues threw me a little party in the break room with a sheet cake that said Ruby Jean, 34 years of heart, and I cried like a baby. Good tears. Honest tears. My husband Gerald passed away 11 years ago from a heart attack. He was a good man, a quiet man, a man who fixed things around the house without being asked and always left me the last cup of coffee in the pot. We were married for 32 years and I still reach for him sometimes in the morning before I am fully awake. You never really stop reaching. But life goes on, and Gerald would have wanted it to go on, so I kept going forward one day at a time. My son Thomas, who everyone calls Tom, is 43 years old. He works in commercial real estate here in Orlando, and he does well for himself. He is a handsome man, tall like his father, with Gerald's same easy smile. Tom married Kendra 8 years ago. Kendra Whitaker. She is 38 years old, always perfectly put together, hair done, nails done, dressed well. I am not saying that is a bad thing. A woman can love looking nice. I love looking nice myself. I get my hair set every 2 weeks at a little salon on Orange Blossom Trail called Patrice's, and I am not ashamed of that. No, the way Kendra looks is not the problem. The problem is what lives underneath all that careful polish. But I am getting ahead of myself, and this story deserves to be told properly from the beginning. Tom and Kendra have 2 children. My granddaughter Madison is 19 years old. Just finished her first year at the University of Central Florida. She is bright and funny, and she texts me things I do not always understand, but I always respond with a heart, because I love her completely. My grandson Ethan is 12 and obsessed with video games and building things and asking questions about absolutely everything. He called me last Tuesday to ask what a neutron star was, and I told him I was a nurse, not an astrophysicist, but I looked it up for him anyway because that is what grandmothers do. I love those 2 children with every cell in my body. Now let me tell you about my vacation fund. After Gerald died, I did not travel for a long time. There was too much grief and too much quiet and too much just getting through the days. But when I retired, I told myself I was going to do the thing Gerald and I always talked about doing together. We were going to go to the Italian coast. Amalfi. We had a picture on our refrigerator for years. A scenic calendar photo of cliffside houses and blue water and lemon trees. Gerald used to point at it and say, Ruby Jean, one day we are going to stand right there and look at all of that and eat the best pasta we have ever had in our lives. We never got to go. He died before we got to go. So when I retired, I started saving. I am not a wealthy woman. I have my hospital pension, Gerald's life insurance that I have been very careful with, and my Social Security. I live modestly. I cook at home most nights. I clip coupons. I do not buy things I do not need. Every single month for 3.5 years I put money aside in what I called my Italy fund. By this past spring I had saved $14,000. $14,000 saved over 3.5 years on a fixed retirement income. I was so proud of that number. I wrote it on a notepad and put it on my refrigerator. I had found a small hotel in Positano with a terrace overlooking the water where the owner brought guests fresh lemons from the garden every morning. That was where I wanted to stay. I could see it clearly. Now here is where Kendra enters this story, and where everything begins to unravel. About 5 months ago, Tom came to me and said he and Kendra and the kids wanted to plan a family vacation. Maybe the Caribbean, he said. Madison was home from college for the summer, Ethan was out of school. It would be a good time for everyone to be together. They were thinking the Turks and Caicos Islands. He showed me pictures on his phone. White sand, turquoise water, the kind of place that looks almost too perfect to be real but actually is just that real. I said, Tom, that sounds wonderful, I would love to come. He said, Mama, that is exactly why I am asking you. He said I would stay in the suite with them, just pay my own airfare and spending money, the hotel was handled by them. That seemed perfectly fair. I was happy. I told my best friend Evelyn Hargrove about it that very afternoon. Evelyn lives 4 houses down from me on Magnolia Terrace Drive, and has been my closest friend for 22 years. She is 68 years old, a retired schoolteacher, and the kind of woman who tells you the truth even when you might prefer a comfortable lie. I went over and she brought me iced tea on her back porch and I told her about the trip and she said, Ruby Jean, you deserve a vacation. When is the last time you went anywhere real? I said, honestly, Evelyn, the last trip I took was a long weekend in Savannah 2 years ago. She said, well then go. I said, I am planning on it. Here is what I did not know at the time. I did not know Tom and Kendra had been having real financial disagreements between them. Tom told me this much later after everything fell apart. He told me Kendra had a habit of buying expensive things without talking to him first, that they had argued about it more than once before. I did not know any of this because Tom is private about his marriage and I have always respected that. But looking back now I can see every single piece and how it all fits together into the picture I was missing. The vacation was booked. Tom found a beautiful resort at Grace Bay in the Turks and Caicos. A big suite that could hold all 5 of us. He sent me the confirmation email and my heart just lifted right up when I read it. 2 weeks in paradise with my son and my grandchildren. I went shopping for resort clothes, light dresses, a sun hat, a new bathing suit with the little skirt panel I have worn since I turned 60, and feel no need to apologize for whatsoever. I bought sunscreen in bulk from the Costco on Vineland Road. I was ready. I was genuinely so ready. Then about 6 weeks before departure Tom called me and his voice was tight. Not angry, just tight, the way it gets when he is holding something in hard. He said, Mama, I need to tell you something and I need you to stay calm. I said, Tom, that is not a sentence that makes a person calm. That is a sentence that makes a person's blood pressure go up about 20 points immediately. He said, I know. He said, there was money set aside for the trip, spending money for all of us on the ground, and it is gone. I said, what do you mean gone? He said, Kendra spent it. He said it fast and flat. The way you say something you have been trying to find words for over several days and finally just decide to say it straight out loud. He said she had been following fashion influencer accounts online and wanted designer bags. And she had spent the entire vacation fund on 3 bags without telling him. Each one of them cost more than my monthly grocery budget for a full year. I sat down in my kitchen chair. I said, Tom. Just his name and nothing else for a long moment. He said, Mama. I am so sorry, I did not know until the credit card statement arrived, and by then the money was already completely gone. I said, Tom, how much exactly? He said, just under $9,000. $9,000 on 3 designer handbags. I want to be very clear about something important. That $9,000 was not my money. Tom had never asked me to contribute to the hotel or the family spending fund. He had set it aside himself and Kendra had spent it on luxury goods without telling him, without asking, without a single word of conversation about whether that was a responsible use of money specifically designated for their family vacation. But the effect of what she did touched everything. The hotel booking could not be changed without major penalty fees at that point. Airfare was already purchased. The cash Tom had set aside for food and excursions and activities and incidentals for 2 weeks in the Caribbean was simply gone. Sitting in Kendra's closet. Tom sounded exhausted. He said the hotel could not be changed. Flights were already bought. He had been staring at spreadsheets for days trying to find numbers that were not there. I told him I needed to think. I made myself a strong cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen table. Then I called Evelyn. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about her. When I finished she said, Ruby Jean, what are you going to do? I said, I do not know yet. She said, whatever you do, do it calmly. I said, Evelyn, I am 70 years old and I spent 34 years delivering emergency care to people who were bleeding out. Calm is just my resting condition. She said, but this is your son and your grandchildren and that is different from the hospital. She was right. Because my first feeling was not only anger at Kendra. My first feeling was sadness for Madison and Ethan. Those children had been so genuinely excited about this trip. Madison had texted me about it. She sent me a list of things she wanted to do at Grace Bay. Ethan had asked me about snorkeling and we had looked up the fish he might see. They were so looking forward to this. And now because their mother decided she needed 3 designer bags, their vacation might fall apart in ways they did not deserve and absolutely did not cause. I decided the trip was not going to be ruined. Not for my grandchildren. Not for Tom. I was going to use some of my Italy fund to cover what was needed. And after we returned home I was going to have a direct and honest conversation with Kendra. I also decided something else, something I kept quietly to myself while I made my plan. I called my travel agent, Mr. Randall Brooks. I have used Randall for years. He works off International Drive and he has arranged several trips for me over the years. Randall is thorough and careful, and when he says something will happen, it always happens. I told him what I needed. He said, "Ruby Jean, you call me whenever you need me." Then I transferred $7,000 from my Italy fund. $7,000 I had saved over months and months, dollar by dollar, quiet evening by quiet evening. I did it and felt a real pang in my chest. Gerald. The lemon trees. But then I thought of Ethan asking about the fish and Madison sending that list, and I clicked the transfer button and I did not let myself cry. There would be time for that later. I called Tom back and told him what I was doing. He refused immediately. He said, "Mama, absolutely not. I cannot let you use your retirement savings because of what Kendra did." I said, "Tom, listen to me. I am not doing this for Kendra. I am doing this for you and for Madison and for Ethan. Those children did not do one thing wrong, and they should not suffer the consequences of their mother's choices. I want this trip to happen." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mama, I will pay you back every single cent." I said, "Tom, I know you will. I trust you. I always have." 2 days later Kendra called me. I almost did not answer, but I am a grown woman and I do not avoid things. She said, "Ruby Jean, Tom told me you offered to help with the trip money." I said, "That is right, I did." She said, "That was not necessary." I said, "Kendra, the vacation fund was spent, someone had to address it." She said, "Tom and I were handling it." I said, "I understand that, and I decided I wanted to help." Then she said, "I hope this does not come with a lecture attached." I took a long, slow, deliberate breath before I responded. The kind I learned in 34 years of nursing when a situation called for calm professionalism instead of whatever words were actually forming in my head. I said, "Kendra, I did not call you. You called me." She said, "Yes, I called to say thank you, but also I said, Kendra, you are welcome for the help." I left it exactly there. Not the time or the place for more. That time was coming. In the weeks before departure, Kendra did 2 things. I filed away carefully the way I used to document notes on a patient chart. First she told Madison, and Madison told me without knowing what she was revealing, that Grandma Ruby Jean was overreacting to a small financial mix-up that was really between her and Tom and none of anyone else's business. Second, I overheard her on the phone at Tom's house during Sunday dinner telling a friend that her mother-in-law was making a big deal out of nothing, and she had the situation completely under control. She did not know I was in the hallway. I had come in through the back door as I often do, let myself in quietly, went to the kitchen, set my casserole dish on the counter, said hello to Ethan, and said nothing at all about what I had just heard. I filed it away. I am very good at filing things. The trip began on a Thursday morning. Tom picked me up at 6:30 in his SUV. When we landed in Providenciales, the warm air hit us like a perfumed embrace, and Ethan pressed his face to the terminal window to look at the palm trees, and I felt my heart do something generous and expansive, the way it does when I am somewhere beautiful and the people I love are right beside me. The resort was truly stunning. The suite had a living area, kitchenette, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a terrace with a view of water so perfectly turquoise that you assume it must be enhanced in photographs, but it simply is not. It is genuinely just that color, real and honest and extraordinary. Madison gasped when she saw it. Ethan ran to the railing and said, "Grandma Ruby Jean, look at that." I stood beside him and I looked and I thought, yes, this was worth every single penny. The first days were wonderful. Ethan snorkeled and saw a spotted eagle ray, and talked about it without stopping for 3 days. Madison and I had a long breakfast together on the terrace one morning, just the 2 of us, and she told me about her first year of college and her friends and a boy she had been texting and a professor she had really connected with. I sat across from her and listened and thought, this is worth every cent I moved out of that account. On the 5th evening at dinner at the resort restaurant, with ceiling fans turning overhead and the sound of the ocean all around us, Kendra said something that shifted the entire temperature of everything. Tom had ordered wine. The food had just arrived. And Kendra, in a bright social voice, said she had run into a woman at the pool who told her about a Maldives resort for next year. And she already had some bags in mind that she wanted to coordinate with resort looks for a trip like that. She had seen them online just last week. She kept talking. About bags. About a future expensive trip. About coordinating accessories for it. While we sat at a table that existed only because I had taken $7,000 from the fund I spent 3.5 years building for Gerald. While Tom sat beside her with his jaw slightly tight. While Madison watched me across the table with those careful eyes. I put my fork down. I picked up my water glass. I said, Kendra. She stopped and looked at me. I said, I am glad you are enjoying yourself. She said, of course, Ruby Jean, thank you so much for your contribution. She said it as though it was a small charitable donation. I said, it was not a contribution, Kendra. It was a rescue. There is a significant difference. She opened her mouth. I said, not here, not at this table, not in front of the children. We will talk. She looked at Tom. Tom looked at the ocean. I picked up my fork and finished my dinner. The next morning I went to the resort business center early before anyone was awake and called Randall Brooks on his personal mobile. He answered on the second ring. I confirmed the arrangements we had discussed before the trip. He confirmed them. I thanked him. That afternoon Kendra and I had our conversation. Tom offered to be there and I said, no, this is between Kendra and me. Please take the children to the beach. He took them. Kendra and I sat on the terrace together. The water was right there in front of us. Clear and blue and honest. I said, Kendra, I am going to speak plainly and respectfully, and I am going to ask you to do the same. I said, I saved $14,000 over 3.5 years for a trip to Italy. I saved it dollar by dollar on a fixed retirement income because I wanted to honor a promise I made with my late husband. A promise we never got to keep before he died. When Tom told me you had spent $9,000 on designer bags without telling him, without any conversation about whether that was responsible use of money set aside specifically for your family's vacation, I had a choice. I could have stayed home. I could have let this trip fall apart. I could have watched my grandchildren be disappointed by something they did not cause. I chose not to do that. I took $7,000 from Gerald's memory fund, and I made sure your children could have this trip. I want you to understand the full weight of that. She was quiet. I said, you told Madison I was overreacting to a small mix-up. You were overheard telling a friend that I was making a big deal out of nothing. That is not a person seeking accountability. That is a person trying to make a problem disappear by making the person who noticed it seem like the unreasonable one. She took her sunglasses off. She said, I know I made a mistake. I said, Kendra, you knew the money was for the trip. Tom told you directly not to spend it. You spent it anyway. That is a choice, not a mistake. She said nothing to that. I said, I am not your enemy. I never have been. But I will not be taken advantage of and I will not be managed. She said quietly, I am sorry, Ruby Jean. I said, I believe you are beginning to be. I said, I am listening whenever you are ready to give me a real one. Tom texted asking if they could come back. I said yes. On the 11th day of the trip, Tom opened his airline app to check the Wednesday return details. He looked at his phone. Looked again. He said, Mama. He said, your seat is business class. He said, Kendra's return ticket has been canceled. The next seat available on Wednesday's flight is $1,400. Kendra looked up from the couch. She said, what? Tom said her name and showed her the screen. She stood. She said, what do you mean my ticket is canceled? He said it was modified through Randall Brooks Travel. He looked at me. He said, Mama, did you do this? I picked up my water glass. I took a sip. I said, Kendra, $1,400 is approximately what one of those bags cost. The math feels about right. The silence in that suite I will remember for the rest of my life. The ceiling fan turned slowly. The ocean was right outside. Ethan and Madison were at the beach. It was the three of us. Tom said, Mama, did you cancel Kendra's return ticket? I said, I modified the booking with Randall's assistance. I said, Kendra is welcome to rebook at the current fare. I believe she knows how to find $1,400 when she wants something. Kendra said, you cannot be serious. I said, Kendra, I am a 70-year-old retired registered nurse who spent 34 years being completely serious in genuine emergencies. I said, you spent $9,000 of your family's vacation fund on designer bags without telling your husband. I covered $7,000 of that damage from money I had saved over 3.5 years for a trip honoring my dead husband's memory. I said, I want all three of us to be clear on the relationship between choices and their consequences. She turned to Tom. She said, tell her this is insane. Tom looked at me. I could see the corner of his mouth doing something very controlled. He said, Kendra, I think he put his phone down, picked it back up, put it down again. I said, Tom, I will cover your seat change if you want to sit beside her. He said, Mama. He pressed his lips firmly together. He said, I am comfortable in my current seat. Kendra sat back on the couch. That very controlled stillness that comes just before tears. I felt a passing sympathy for it, but I did not let it move me. Sympathy is not absolution. She said very quietly, how do I get home? I said, Randall Brooks can help you rebook. His number is in Tom's phone. I said, there may also be seats on other carriers at different price points. It is worth checking. I said, you are a resourceful woman, Kendra. When you want something, you generally find a way to get it. She picked up her beach bag and walked out the door. Tom and I sat alone. After a moment he said, Mama. I said, yes. He said, I am not going to tell you that was the wrong thing to do. I said, good, because I would have disagreed. He said, I am also not going to say it was entirely right. I said, I hear that, Tom, and I respect it. He said, she booked something this morning, I think. She made a call from the far end of the terrace and came back doing arithmetic in her head. I said, good. He said, Mama, I am going to pay you back every cent. I said, Tom, I know you will. I trust you. I always have. The last full day was warm and sweet. All 5 of us went to the beach and Tom rented paddleboards and he and Madison kept falling off them and Ethan sat on the shore and laughed at them with the magnificent cruelty only a 12-year-old can bring to a family member's physical failure. Kendra sat beside me on a beach chair. At one point she said, Ruby Jean, I know I owe you a real apology. Not the version I gave on the terrace. An actual honest one. I said, I am listening whenever you are ready. She nodded. I believe she meant it. That evening Tom made reservations and we all dressed up a little. Ethan wore a collared shirt he complained about for 40 minutes and then forgot entirely once the bread basket arrived. Madison wore a yellow sundress and looked so much like Tom at her age that I had to look away for a moment, because it caught me off guard. Tom raised his glass and said, to family. We all raised ours. Even Kendra, whose eyes met mine briefly over the rim. I said, to family, and I meant every word. Wednesday morning we checked out and at Miami we separated. Tom walked me to where we needed to split directions. He hugged me for a long time. He said, Mama, I love you. I said, I love you too, Tom. I have always been proud of you and I am still proud of you. He said, things are going to change at home. I said, I hope they do, not for me, but for you and for those children. Madison appeared and hugged me hard enough to nearly knock my hat off. She said, Grandma Ruby Jean, I love you so much. I said, Madison Grace Whitaker, I love you beyond measure. Do not ever forget it. Ethan stood in front of me with his solemn face. He said, Grandma, spotted eagle rays can travel hundreds of miles. That one is probably still swimming somewhere amazing. I said, Ethan, I believe that completely. He said, I am really glad we came on this trip. I said, me too, baby. Me too. He gave me a quick hug, the casual kind designed to look unsentimental, and went back to his father. I walked to my gate. I settled into my wide business class seat. I ordered a club soda with lemon. I looked out at the clear Caribbean sky and I thought about Gerald. I thought about Italy. I still had $7,000 less than before all of this started. But I was not defeated. I was 70 years old and a retired nurse who had handled harder things, and I would save the money again. It would take longer. The Amalfi Coast is not going anywhere. The lemon trees will still be there. Gerald can wait a little longer. He was patient in life and I trust he is patient still. I got home Wednesday evening. Oliver the cat was deeply offended by my absence and communicated this forcefully for 45 minutes before forgiving me for an extra portion of his supper. I unpacked everything properly and made myself a cup of tea and went and sat on my front porch. The evening air in Orlando in summer smells like gardenias and cut grass, and a little bit of rain and somebody nearby was grilling. The ceiling fan wobbled its usual wobble. The light at the end of Magnolia Terrace Drive turned that thick warm orange unique to Florida evenings. Evelyn appeared at my porch steps before I had been sitting 5 minutes. She had 2 slices of pound cake on a plate. She came up and sat beside me and said, Ruby Jean. I said, Evelyn. She said, "Tell me everything." I said, "It is a long story." She said, "I have absolutely nowhere to be tonight." So I told her all of it. Every bit. When I finished, she said, "Ruby Jean Whitaker, you are the most composed woman I have ever known." I said, 34 years of nursing, composure is just a habit now." She said, "In Italy." I said, "In Italy. I will get there." She said, "And when you do, you are going to drink a limoncello on that terrace and feel Gerald right beside you." I said, "Yes. I know I will." We ate the pound cake. The orange light faded to rose and then to the soft gray blue of a Florida summer evening. Oliver pressed his face against the screen door to look out at us because he is a nosy cat and always has been. I am telling you this story today from this same front porch on Magnolia Terrace Drive. Tom called this morning. He and Kendra have begun what he described as necessary and honest conversations. A wire transfer is coming this week for the first installment of what he owes me. I told him there was no rush and he said, "Mama, there absolutely is a rush, please let me do this." I said, "Okay, Tom. Thank you." He said, "Thank you for coming on this trip." I said, "There was nowhere else I would have been." Madison texted me a meme about grandmothers being the original gangsters. I sent back a heart and a laughing emoji. She sent 17 hearts back. I count that as a complete victory. Ethan called this afternoon to tell me spotted eagle rays can leap completely out of the water. He said, "Grandma, did you know they breach like whales do?" I said, "Ethan, I did not know that." He said, "Imagine just leaping completely out of the element you live in whenever you want to." I said, "Ethan, that is a beautiful way to think about it." He said, "Grandma, I love you." I said, "I love you more than there are spotted eagle rays in the whole Caribbean Sea." He said, "That is a lot." I said, "I know." I opened a new savings account yesterday morning and made the first deposit back toward Italy. It is a smaller number than before. But it is a real number and it is growing, and every month it will grow a little more. Gerald's calendar picture is still on my refrigerator. Amalfi is still there. The cliffside houses and the blue water and the lemon trees, waiting for a 70-year-old retired nurse from Orlando, Florida, who keeps her word and keeps her peace and keeps going. I want to say one more thing before I finish. I do not hate Kendra. I am not a woman who runs on hate. Hate is corrosive and draining, and I have watched it eat people from the inside, and I want no part of it. What I did with that return ticket was not revenge in the darkest sense. It was accountability. It was making sure that a real choice had a consequence that was proportional and could not be minimized or explained away as nothing. It was about being a 70-year-old woman who worked 34 honest years in service of other people, who saved carefully, who raised a good son, who tends her garden, who built her life with integrity, and who does not intend in the years she has left on this beautiful warm Florida earth to be treated as anything less than exactly what she is. I am Ruby Jean Whitaker. I am 70 years old. I live on Magnolia Terrace Drive in Orlando, Florida, with a wobbling ceiling fan on my porch and roses along my front fence and a cat named Oliver, and a best friend named Evelyn 4 houses down, and a son I am proud of and 2 grandchildren I love beyond the capacity of language to express. I worked 34 years as a registered nurse, and I retired with my dignity and my savings and my plans intact. I am patient. I am composed. I am warm. I am capable of an extraordinary kind of love. And I do not let people spend my vacation fund without consequence. Tell me where you are watching from and comment your city below. If you love your grandma, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this story with your friends. She deserves to know you love her. Every single grandma does.